No son of mine was ever going to sign that house over to a colored girl from the east side, my mother-in-law said, sliding the eviction notice across my own kitchen table. The paper stopped against my coffee cup. 30 days to vacate. A constable's stamp at the bottom, blue and official, like it had any business sitting on the oilcloth my grandmother ironed flat with her own hands. I did not pick it up. I folded my fingers together on the table, the way I do at work when a stranger is lying to me about a property line, and I looked at Maybelline Pickett, and I said, low and even. You want to read that part out loud again, Maybelline? Slow. She didn't. She had said it once, in front of everybody, and once was the point. Royce stared at his plate. My husband of 19 years stared at a chicken thigh and a spoonful of greens like they were the most fascinating things in Lubbock, Texas, and he did not lift his head, and he did not say my name. Nobody moved. Cousin Earl set his fork down without a sound. Royce's sister pressed her napkin to her mouth. The cobbler was still warm on the counter. Peach, the whole kitchen sweet with it, and not one person at that Sunday table opened their mouth to say that this was wrong. Here is what none of them knew, sitting in my kitchen on Dade Avenue, passing the rolls. By the time a constable actually came to put me out, the only name left on that door would be mine. The people laughing behind their napkins at the filing cabinet wife, the woman who stamps paper for a living, were about to learn exactly what a paper stamping woman can read. Because Royce Pickett had filed an eviction on a house, and he had never once checked whose name was on the deed. He thought it was his. His mother had told him it was his blood's. And there was a green tin in a locked cedar chest in the back bedroom, rusted at the hinges, with 6 words scratched into the lid by a paring knife in 1991. For the day, the door locks. That day had just been scheduled. Now let me take you back. My name is Winona Pickett. I am 52 years old and I read land for a living. That is the closest way I know to say it. I work in the Lubbock County Deeds Office, 3rd floor of the courthouse downtown, and my job is to take a single piece of ground and trace it backward through time. Who owns it now? Who owned it before that? Every sale, every mortgage, every death and divorce and tax lien that ever touched it, all the way back through the decades until the chain runs out. Title abstractor. People hear that and their eyes go soft and far away, the way they do when you tell them you're an accountant or you fix watches. Quiet work. Filing cabinet work. It is not quiet work. It is the work of finding out whether the ground a family is standing on is actually theirs. Most days nobody thinks about that. One day they think about nothing else. I learned why it mattered when I was 9. We lived back then in a little frame house on Court Avenue, my mother and my father and me. And one autumn, a man in a good hat came to the door with papers, and the papers said the house was no longer ours. My father held those papers up to the lamp and turned them over and over, and I watched a grown man who could fix any engine in the county hold a piece of paper he could not read. Not the words. He could read the words. He could not read what they meant. There was a signature that wasn't his on a line that decided everything, and he had no way to prove the difference. And nobody in that house knew how to walk into a courthouse and pull the truth out of a drawer. We lost it. Just like that, the way you lose a wallet, except a wallet doesn't have your mother crying in the front seat of a borrowed car with everything we owned in the trunk. My grandmother took us in. Cordelia Hargrove. Everybody from First and Date all the way down to the Canyon Lakes called her Dovey. And you have to understand who Dovey was in this town, because the whole of what I'm telling you turns on it. Dovey Hargrove was the first black woman the county ever hired to record deeds. 1960s, a back desk, a job nobody white wanted because it was tedious and it didn't pay. And she sat at that desk for 30 years, and she learned the entire skeleton of who owned what in East Lubbock. She knew where every line ran. She knew which families had clean title and which were one slick man with a good hat away from the front seat of a borrowed car. She sat me down at her kitchen table, the same table, the one Maybelline would one day slide a notice across, and she said, Baby, they took that house because nobody in it could read. Not letters. Anybody can read letters. They took it because nobody could read the deed. You were going to learn to read the deed. So I did. I learned it from her before I learned to drive. By the time I was grown, I could pull a chain of title faster than anybody on the third floor, and the young clerks brought their hard ones to me, the tangled estates, the lots that had been sold twice, and I'd run a finger down the index and find the crack in it. Ardella Bunn, the surveyor, used to say I could hear a forged deed the way some people can hear a flat tire. She wasn't entirely wrong. And I married Royce. I want to be fair about Royce because the easy thing would be to tell you he was always a snake, and he wasn't. Not at the start. When I met him, he sold trucks at a lot off the Brownfield Highway, and he was good at it, charming in that loose hometown way, and he laughed at my work instead of at me. The filing cabinet wife, he'd call me, but back then he'd say it grinning, with his arm around my shoulder at a cookout. Don't get her started on a deed, she'll be at it till midnight. It sounded like pride then. It is amazing how a man can use the exact same words for pride and for contempt. And you don't notice the day they switch. They switched somewhere in the last few years, around the time the dealership started bleeding. I didn't have the numbers then, but I had the smell of it. A man who used to come home easy started coming home tight in the jaw, on the phone in the truck in the driveway with the engine off, going quiet when I opened the door, and his mother started coming around more. Maybelline Pickett never wanted me. That was not a secret, not a thing I have to reach for. From the first Sunday, she sat in my house and complimented the cobbler in a voice that made it an insult. She made it plain that her Royce had married down and married wrong, and she had a particular idea about what wrong meant that I will not put in her mouth twice. She never accepted me at her son's table. The cruelty of it was that she sat at mine. She ate off my plates and she planned in her head for the day I wouldn't have any. Because here is the part Royce thought I didn't see. The dealership was underwater. Maybelline's own little trust, the one she'd held over the family like a church key for years, was empty, had been empty, and she needed her son to make it whole. And Royce, my husband, had looked around at what we had, and the only thing we had that was worth real money was the house. The bungalow on Dade Avenue, brick, with a deep porch and a pecan tree out front that drops on the steps every fall. 3 bedrooms, paid for. In a town where a paid-for house in a neighborhood that started to turn is the difference between drowning and not. He looked at it the way that man with the good hat once looked at the house on Quirt, as an asset that was simply waiting for the right paperwork. What I would learn later, pulling the records with my own hands, was that he had already started moving. There was a second mortgage. He had taken money against the house, quietly, months before any of this, to pour into the dealership's open wound, and he had done it the way a man does when he's certain the thing he's borrowing against belongs to him. He never doubted it for a second. He had grown up in the idea that a man's house is a man's house. His mother had stitched that idea into him before he could walk. A man's house belongs to his blood, and he never once did the thing I do for strangers every single day. He never pulled the chain. He never read the deed. He never asked himself the one question my grandmother taught me to ask first, before anything, before you trust a single word on the page, whose name is actually on it. The Sunday it happened, I'd made the cobbler at 6 in the morning. That's mine. That's not a thing I do for show. I'm up before the birds because that's the hour Dovey got up, and the house is honest at that hour. I had the good tablecloth out. I had the Sunday plates stacked by the stove for whoever came by hungry, which is how that table has always run. You eat. If you're under this roof at noon, that was Dovey's law, and I kept it. They came at noon. Royce and his mother and a few cousins, and Maybelline had a manila envelope in her good church purse, and she waited. She waited until the plates were full and the room was warm and there were witnesses. She is not a stupid woman. She wanted it public. She wanted it to land in front of family so that by the time I understood what was happening, I'd already be alone with it. And then she slid the notice across my own kitchen table, and she said what she said. 30 days to vacate, the constable's stamp, my husband studying a chicken thigh. I sat there and I felt the floor of 19 years go out from under me. I won't pretend I didn't. There's a particular cold that comes up through you when the person you sleep next to won't say your name in your own kitchen. I felt 9 years old again. I felt the front seat of the borrowed car. And then a second thing came up underneath the cold, slower, and it steadied me. And it was my grandmother's voice at this table saying, "You are going to learn to read the deed." I did not cry. I have not cried in front of those people once, and I did not start that day. I folded my hands and I asked Maybelline to read it again slow, and she wouldn't. And I let the silence sit there in the cobbler smell and do its work, and I watched Royce not look up. Then I stood and I cleared my own plate and I rinsed it and I set it in the rack, calm. A woman doing dishes. I said, "You all finish up. There's more cobbler." And I walked back through my house to the back bedroom where there is a cedar chest at the foot of the bed that has been locked as long as I have owned the place. Locked since the day Dovey handed me the key and told me not to open it until the day the door locked on me. I never had. For 19 years, it sat there, a locked box in a quiet room, and I let it be, because some part of me understood that whatever was inside was meant for a day I was praying would never come. That day had come. I knelt down in front of that cedar chest with the eviction notice still warm from my mother-in-law's hand, and I took out the small brass key I had carried on my ring for 19 years without once using it, and I fitted into the lock. Behind me, in the kitchen, somebody laughed. The filing cabinet wife had gone off to her files. Let them laugh. I was about to read the one deed in Lubbock County that none of them had ever thought to check. The brass key turned like it had been waiting 19 years to turn, which I suppose it had. The lid of that cedar chest came up with a sigh of old wood and older air, and the smell that rose out of it was Dovey, plain as if she'd walked into the room. Cedar and rosewater and the faint, dry breath of paper that has been kept somewhere dark and loved. On top, there was a quilt I remembered from her bed, the one with the courthouse steps pattern pieced in browns and golds, and I lifted it out and set it on the floor because some things you do not let touch the ground even when your hands are shaking. Underneath the quilt was a shoebox of photographs I would weep over some other day, and underneath that, wrapped in a flour sack towel gone soft as skin, was the tin, the green tin, fireproof, the cheap kind they sold at the hardware on Broadway in those years, painted a green that had mostly rusted to the color of a penny left in the rain, and scratched into the lid in letters dug deep with the point of a paring knife by a hand I had watched snap beans at this very table. 6 words. For the day the door locks. I sat back on my heels on the floor of my own back bedroom and I read those 6 words, and behind me the laughter in the kitchen had thinned to murmuring, the murmuring of people who think the show is over and are getting back to the cobbler. And I understood, kneeling there, that my grandmother had not written those words about a metaphor. She had not meant the day my heart locked up or the day my marriage soured. She was a deed woman. She meant a door. She meant a lock. She meant a day exactly like this one, a constable's stamp and 30 days, and she had reached forward through 15 years in the ground to leave me a tin for the precise hour it arrived. I did not open it right there. I want you to understand the discipline of that because it is the whole of who Dovey made me. Everything in my body wanted to tear the lid off that tin on the bedroom floor. Instead, I wrapped it back in its towel, and I picked up the second thing that had been lying beside it, a small flat case of cracked leather, and I knew that one by its weight before I opened it. Her loupe, the little folding magnifier she carried in her coat pocket for 30 years, the abstractor's loupe, the glass she'd put over 1,000 faded recording stamps to read the dates the county clerk's bad ink had tried to bury. I slipped it into my own coat pocket where it has lived ever since. And I felt, for the first time since Maybelline opened her purse, something that was not grief. I closed the chest. I went back out and I told my company goodnight in a steady voice. And I do not think one of them understood that the woman pouring the last of the sweet tea into a jar for Cousin Earl to take home was no longer afraid of them. Royce would not meet my eyes at the door. Maybelline told me on her way out that 30 days was Christian of them, that some folks would have given 15. I told her to drive safe. I meant it the way you mean it to weather. Then they were gone, and I sat alone at the table with the eviction notice and the green tin, and I read the deed. I want to tell you what was in that tin, but first I have to tell you about the next morning, because the tin alone would not have been enough. A piece of paper in a box proves nothing. My father had a box of papers too. What mattered was not what Dovey left me in Cedar. What mattered was what Dovey left in the public record, in plain sight, in the very building where I clock in. I did not sleep. Around 4, I gave up and made coffee and laid the contents of the tin out under the kitchen light. A warranty deed, recorded, with the county clerk's stamp right there in the corner. The recording number and the volume and page in Dovey's own careful printing, in the margin where a recorder writes herself a note. A declaration of trust, 11 pages, typed on a machine with a sticky lowercase a, and the grantor name on both. The entity that had taken title to my bungalow on Dade Avenue in the spring of 1991 was not Cordelia Hargrove. It was Dovey Land and Legacy. I had seen that name before. That was the thing that put the coffee down cold in my stomach. In 19 years on the 3rd floor, I had crossed Dovey Land and Legacy in the grantor-grantee index maybe 4 times, and every time I had skated past it as some defunct little holding outfit, the kind of name that turns up on East Lubbock parcels from that era and means nothing. I had never once stopped to ask who Dovey Land and Legacy was. The answer had been sitting in the first 3 letters the whole time, and I had been too close to it to read it. She had named it after herself, hidden in plain view, a joke and a fortress at the same time, and she had deeded my house into it and then written, in the trust, a single beneficiary and sole owner, to take full title upon the recording of this instrument. My name, Winona. Not Pickett. I wasn't Pickett yet in 1991. I was barely grown. Winona, by my maiden name, with a line that read, "And any married name she shall later take." The same and entire. She had thought of the husband I did not yet have. She had thought of his name riding in front of mine someday, and she had closed that door before I ever met the man who would try to walk me out of it. Paid in full. No mortgage, no lien, no nothing. Recorded April of 1991 and sitting in the public record of Lubbock County untouched for 35 years, a thing any soul on earth could have pulled for a $2 copy fee, including the man I married, including the woman who slid a notice across my table. They never pulled it. It never crossed their minds that the filing cabinet wife might be standing on filed ground. I called Ardella Bunn at 7 because Ardella has been up since 5 her whole life, and because I needed one other human being who speaks the language to tell me I was not dreaming. Ardella Bunn surveyed half the lots in this part of the county before she retired, and when I read her the recording number off Dovey's margin note, she was quiet for a moment, and then she laughed, low, the laugh of an old woman who has seen the machinery work the right way for once. "Child," she said, "you taught half this courthouse to read a deed. Now go read your own. Go in there and pull the chain. Don't take the tin. The tin's for you. Pull the chain like it's a stranger's, like it's a job, and write down everything you find." That is exactly what I did. And what I found is the part of this that I am still, all these months later, not entirely able to sit still inside of. I went up to the 3rd floor on a Tuesday and I pulled the chain of title on my own house, the way I'd pull it for any client, working backward, parcel by parcel, instrument by instrument. The 1991 deed into Dovey Land and Legacy sat there clean. And then, layered on top of it, recorded just this past spring, I found a quitclaim deed. A quitclaim is a small, ugly thing. It doesn't promise you own anything. It just says, whatever I've got, I hand to you. And this one said that Winona Pickett, a married woman, did hereby quitclaim all her interest in the property to her husband, Royce Pickett. Dated in April. Notarized, recorded. I had never seen it before in my life. I had never signed it. And there, at the bottom, was my name in a hand that swooped the W in a way I have never once swooped it, sitting above a notary's seal, and I took out Dovey's loop and I unfolded the little glass, and I bent over that seal the way she taught me 40 years ago, and the morning went very quiet around me. The notary's name under that crimped little stamp was Verlene Aldridge. I knew that name too. Verlene Aldridge plays bridge at Maybelline Pickett's table on Thursdays. Has for years. Now. You have probably already guessed what was inside that forged paper. You have not guessed the half of it, because I did not stop at my own parcel. Once I had Verlene Aldridge's seal in my eye, that particular crimp, that particular 2 round O in the date, I did what an abstractor does, which is the thing nobody expects and nobody can stop. I started pulling the records for everything that seal had ever touched. The notary's name is on the instrument. The instrument is public. You can follow a single notary through the index like a thread through a hem. It took me 3 days, on my lunches and after hours, and when I was done, I had 3 other deeds in front of me. 3. An old gentleman named Mr. Tolliver, who had lived next door to me on Dade Avenue until the winter he passed, his house quitclaimed away from his estate 8 months ago under that same seal. A widow over on Cedar named Roselle, a man named Pharaoh Biggs on Elm, who I knew from church, 90 years old, who would have signed anything you put in front of him because he trusted that a paper in a good hat was an honest paper, the same way my father had trusted it. All 3 of them old, all 3 of them East Lubbock, all 3 of them holding clean, paid-for ground that somebody had decided was simply sitting there waiting for the right paperwork. And here is the thing that made me set the loop down and put both my hands flat on the 3rd floor table to steady myself. Mr. Tolliver's house, the one next door, the one stolen out of a dead man's estate, was not stolen by accident or by Verlene Aldridge working alone. Because when I traced where Mr. Tolliver's title went after the forged quitclaim, it had been bundled with 2 other parcels as collateral on a loan. And when I pulled the lender's records, I found my own address sitting in the same bundle. The 2nd mortgage. My husband had walked into a bank months before his mother ever opened her church purse at my table, and he had borrowed a frightening amount of money against the bungalow on Dade Avenue. To do that, the bank needed to see that he owned it. So somebody had manufactured a paper that said his wife had handed it to him and stamped it with a bridge partner's seal and slid it into the public record between 2 stolen old people's houses. He had taken the equity out of a home he did not own, using a signature I never wrote, to pour into a truck lot that was going under regardless. And then, when the bank started asking after its money and his mother started asking after her empty trust, the cleanest way to make it all disappear was to put me out of the house entirely, so that no one would ever be standing in those rooms asking whose name was really on the door. He filed an eviction to hide a fraud, and the eviction was the one thing that guaranteed somebody would finally read the deed. I sat up there on the 3rd floor with all of it laid out in front of me. My own house and Mr. Tolliver's and the widow Roselle's and old Pharaoh Biggs's, 4 clean titles and 4 dirty papers and 1 bridge club seal tying them in a bow, and Dovey's loop folded in my hand, and I thought about the front seat of a borrowed car. Then I made copies of everything. 2 sets certified with the recording stamps bright and legal in the corners, and I made 1 phone call to ask when, exactly, the constable was scheduled to come. They changed the locks while I was at work. I want to put that in its right place in the telling, because it happened in the middle of all this. Between the night I opened the cedar chest and the morning I finished pulling the chain, and it is the kind of thing that is meant to break a woman. and I want you to see exactly how little it broke me. It was a Thursday. I came home from the third floor with my satchel over my shoulder and Dovey's loop in my coat pocket, and I went up my own porch steps under my own pecan tree, and my key would not turn. A new brass deadbolt, bright as a tooth, sat in my door where the old worn one had been for 19 years. There was a sticky note on the glass in Royce's handwriting, and it did not even have the decency to be cruel. It just said, "Staying at Mama's. We'll sort your things." Sort my things, as though I were a drawer. I stood on that deep porch in the going light with the canyon lakes turning gray down the way, and the cobbler smell long gone cold out of those rooms, and I will tell you what I felt. And it was not what they wanted me to feel. I felt my grandmother's loop against my hip through the coat. I felt the weight of certified copies in my satchel, and I thought, calm as a Tuesday, you have locked yourself inside a house that is going to ask you some questions. I went and stayed with Ardella Bunn. She made up the back room without a word about it, and she set a cup of coffee in front of me, and she did not tell me it was going to be all right because Ardella Bunn does not lie. What she said was, "You got the chain pulled?" And I said I did. And she said, "Then you're not homeless, child. You're a landlord with a trespasser. There's a difference, and the difference is written down." That sentence kept me upright through the worst of it. A landlord with a trespasser. I lay in Ardella's back room that night, and I turned it over and over like a smooth stone. The whole world thought I had lost my house. The world is so quick to believe a black woman has lost her house. Not one of them, not Royce, not Maybelline, not Verlene Aldridge with her crimped little seal, not the cousins who went silent and then went back to their cobbler, had thought to spend $2 and walk up to the third floor and pull the one record that told the truth. The record had been sitting there since the spring of 1991. It had been sitting there longer than my marriage. It had been sitting there longer than some of those cousins had been alive. And the reason none of them pulled it is the same reason my family lost everything when I was 9. They believe that the paper a confident person hands you is the true paper, and that the quiet record in the public book is just dust. My grandmother spent her life teaching this county the opposite, and they buried the lesson with her, and now I was going to dig it back up on a kitchen table, because that is where I decided to do it. Not in a lawyer's office, though I had one by then, a sharp young woman named Tisha Crane, out of a little firm on Avenue Q, who took one look at my certified copies and got very still and very excited at the same time. Not in a courtroom either, not first. I wanted it done at the table. I wanted it done at my own table on Date Avenue, under the light Dovey ate her supper under, on the day the constable came to put me out, with Royce there and Maybelline there, because some debts are paid in public or they are not really paid. Tisha Crane thought I was sentimental. I told her I was the opposite of sentimental. I told her I was a deed woman, and a deed woman knows that where a thing is recorded matters as much as what it says. The constable was set to come on a Monday morning, 9 o'clock, to enforce the notice and see me removed from the premises. I made sure, through Tisha, that everyone would be present. The eviction was Royce's filing, so Royce would stand on the porch to watch it done. Maybelline would not miss it for the world. That woman had been waiting 19 years to watch me carried off her son's porch, and I knew she would come in her good church coat to see it. And I asked Tisha to make sure the county had a representative there as well, somebody from the recorder's office, somebody who could witness, because what was about to be laid on that table was not a family matter. It had stopped being a family matter the moment that forged quitclaim got slid into the public book between Mr. Tolliver's stolen house and the widow Roselle's. Monday came up clear and hot the way June does in Lubbock, the sky that flat hard blue with not one cloud to soften it, and the pecan tree throwing its lace of shade across the porch where I used to stack the Sunday plates for whoever was hungry. The constable's car pulled up at the curb at 5 before 9. A quiet man named Deputy Constable Hollis Pruitt, with a folder under his arm, and no joy in his face, because the good ones take no joy in it. Royce's truck was already there. He stood up on the porch in a pressed shirt with his arms crossed, not looking at the street, looking at the floorboards the same way he had looked at his plate the day his mother slid the notice across my table. Maybelline sat in a porch chair like a queen in her good navy coat with her purse in her lap, the same purse, and when she saw me come up the walk with Tisha Crane on one side and Ardella Bunn on the other, and a young woman from the recorder's office named Doreen Pickett, no relation, walking behind with a clipboard, Maybelline's mouth went tight. Because a woman being put out of a house does not usually arrive with a delegation. She's not to come in, Maybelline said to the constable. That's the whole point of the morning. She's to be kept out. Hollis Pruitt looked at his folder. Ma'am, the orders for removal of the occupant. Mr. Pickett's the one filed it. He looked uncomfortable already, the way a careful man does when the paper in his hand and the people in front of him have started to disagree. I'd like to come up on the porch, I said. Low and even, hands folded in front of me, the way Dovey folded hers. I'd like to sit at my table one last time. Surely that's Christian. I used Maybelline's own word back to her, gentle as butter, and I watched it land, and she could not say no to it in front of the constable without looking like exactly what she was. She gave a stiff little nod, as though she were granting me a favor, as though she were letting the condemned have a last plate. Royce unlocked his bright new deadbolt, and we all went in, into my kitchen, into the smell of those rooms that was mine and Dovey's before it was ever his, and I set my satchel on the table where the eviction notice had been slid across at me, and I sat down in my own chair. Before the deputy does his work, I said, I'd like to show the family some paperwork, since this is all about paperwork. I said it mild. I said it like a woman asking if anybody wanted more tea. And Maybelline, God help her, actually smiled because she thought, the filing clerk wants to shuffle her papers one more time before she goes. She thought I was about to do the only thing she believed I knew how to do, which was stamp and sort and stamp again. Royce looked at his shoes. Tisha Crane went very quiet by the door with her hand resting on her own satchel, and Doreen from the recorder's office uncapped her pen. I opened my satchel and I took out the first document and I laid it flat on the table and turned it so they could read it, the way you turn a deed for a client. This is the warranty deed of record for this property, I said. Date Avenue. This house, recorded. You can see the county clerk's stamp in the corner, the volume and the page. This is the deed that says who owns the ground we are sitting on. I slid it 3 inches toward the center of the table, the exact distance Maybelline had slid the notice at me, and I watched her eyes go down to it out of habit, because you cannot help but read a paper somebody turns toward you, and that is the whole trick of them. That is what my father never knew. Go on and read the grantee, I said. Read who took title. Maybelline read it. I watched her read it. I watched her get to the name and not understand it, because it was not a person's name. It was the name of a little holding outfit, and her face did the thing a face does when the words make no sense, when the eyes go back to the top of the line and try again. Dovey Land and Legacy, she said, and the way she said it, you could hear she thought it was nothing, some clerical dust, the kind of defunct East Side outfit that means nothing. The same mistake I had made myself for 19 years crossing it in the index. The exact same mistake. That's right, I said. Now read the date it was recorded. She read it. April of 1991. Royce was how old in 1991, I said. To the room, not unkind, just laying it down. We weren't married. I wasn't a Pickett yet. I was barely grown. I let that sit in the cobbler ghost air of that kitchen. This house was deeded into that name and paid in full, no mortgage, no lien, 35 years ago, and it has sat in the public record where any soul on earth could pull it for a $2 fee, every day, including this past spring. I looked up at my husband then, the first time I had looked full at him in weeks, including by you. Royce did not look up from the floor, but I saw his jaw move, the small working it did when something was going wrong, and he had not yet decided which lie to reach for. Maybelline's smile had not left her face yet, because she had not understood. She was still waiting for me to be wrong, still waiting for the filing clerk daughter-in-law to have gotten herself confused among her papers the way women like me supposedly do. So I reached into the satchel and I took out the second document, 11 pages, typed on a machine with a sticky lowercase e, and I laid it on top of the deed and turned it toward her, too. "This is the declaration of trust behind that name," I said. "Dovey Land and Legacy. It's a coded name, Maybelline. It's a woman's joke and a woman's fortress in the same 3 letters. And I'm ashamed it took me till now to read it, because I knew her better than anybody alive. Dovey, my grandmother, Cordelia Hargrove, the first colored woman to record deeds in this county, the woman who taught half that courthouse to read a chain of title. She set this house into trust in 1991, and she named a single beneficiary, sole owner, full title vested upon recording, one name." I put my finger on the line. I did not raise my voice. I have not raised my voice once in this whole telling, and I did not start in that kitchen. It's my name, by my maiden name. And there's a line right under it that reads, "And any married name she shall later take, the same and entire." She thought of the husband I hadn't met yet. She thought of his name riding in front of mine someday, and she closed that door before I was old enough to know there'd ever be a door to close. The smile was gone off Maybelline's face now, gone clean. And the porch had gone quiet behind us, and Hollis Pruitt, the constable, had stopped looking at his folder and started looking at the table, because a careful man can feel when the ground under a morning has shifted. I had 2 more papers in that satchel. The ugly one with my forged name swooped wrong at the bottom, and the one underneath it, the second mortgage, the bank, the bundle. But I did not reach for them yet. I sat with my hands folded over the trust my grandmother typed when I was barely grown, and I let them all feel the floor of that house become, in front of them, exactly what it had been the whole time. I reached into the satchel a 3rd time, and this is the one I had been saving, the one that turned my stomach every time I touched it, and I laid it down on top of the trust so gently you would have thought it was a thing I loved. It was the quitclaim, the ugly paper, the one I had found at work in the index between Mr. Tolliver's stolen house and the widow Roselle's, dated the spring just gone, transferring this property out of that careful old trust and into Royce Pickett's name alone, free and clear, signed at the bottom by Winona Pickett, by me. I turned it so the signature faced Maybelline, and I put my finger an inch from it, not touching it, the way you point at a thing you do not want on your hands. "Now this one," I said, "is interesting, because this is the deed that takes the house out of my grandmother's trust and hands it to your son. This is the paper that would have made the eviction lawful if it were real. You see the signature down there at the bottom. Read me the name." "Winona Pickett," Maybelline said. Her voice had lost its church starch. It came out small. "That's my name," I agreed. "That is the name I sign 40 times a day, stamping other people's business in that office. I know the shape of it better than I know my own face. And I am going to tell you something now, and I want Deputy Constable Pruitt to hear it, and I want Miss Pickett from the recorder's office to write it on her clipboard." I lifted my eyes off the paper and put them on Royce, and I held them there. "I never signed this. I have never in my life signed this paper. I did not sit at any table and quitclaim my grandmother's house to anybody. Somebody made my hand for me. The kitchen was so quiet I could hear the pecan tree moving outside, that dry whispering the leaves do in June. Royce had stopped looking at the floor. He was looking at the quitclaim now the way a man looks at a snake he thought was a rope. "You can see it yourself if you know how to look," I said. "But most people don't know how to look, and that is exactly what they counted on." And here is where I reached into my coat pocket, not the satchel, the coat, and I took out the loop. Dovey's loop. That little brass eye she carried for 50 years, worn smooth at the rim where her thumb went, the glass clear as branch water. I unfolded it on its hinge and I set it down over the notary block at the bottom of the forged deed. the little stamped seal that is supposed to mean a sworn officer of the state watched the signing and swears it true. "Come look, Maybelline," I said. "You especially. Come put your eye to this." She did not want to. But Doreen Pickett from the recorder's office had already come around the table, drawn the way record people are drawn to a seal that is wrong, and she bent over the loop and went very still, and that stillness pulled Maybelline up out of her chair against her own will. The two of them bent over my grandmother's glass. "Tell me what you see in the notary's stamp," I said. Doreen said it because Doreen knew what she was looking at. "The recording date impression sits on top of the notary commission," she said slowly. "That's backward. And the seal's been lifted. You can see the second ghost of it, half a turn off. It was pressed somewhere else and carried onto this page." "It was pressed onto this page," I said, "by the same hand that pressed it onto 3 other pages I could name, lifted from a true document and laid onto a false one. And the commission number under that seal belongs to a notary I happen to know by sight, because she pours the punch at the East Side Bridge Club every second Sunday. Verlene Aldridge. Your bridge partner, Maybelline, the woman you have played cards across from for 30 years. I let that one settle. It was never a stranger that forged me. It was your own card table." Maybelline straightened up off the loop like it had burned her. Her face had gone a color I had never seen on it, gray under the powder, and her mouth opened and shut on nothing. She looked at Royce. For the first time in 19 years, that woman looked at her son for help instead of looking at him like he was the help, and Royce had nothing to give her, because Royce was already somewhere far down inside his own undoing, and I knew where, because I had the last paper. I laid it down. The 4th one, the second mortgage. "This is the last one, and then the deputy can do whatever the law tells him to do," I said. "This is a note from a bank, taken out the same week as that forged quitclaim, a second mortgage, $100 and some thousand borrowed against this house, borrowed by Royce Pickett, who told the bank he owned it, free and clear, and showed them that forged deed to prove it." I looked at my husband. "Your truck lot was going under. I know it was. I've known longer than you think. And your mother's trust that she always held over my head as the family money, that was gone too, spent, empty, and the two of you needed a wall to push the debt into. And the only thing either of you had that looked paid off and solid was this house. So you forged the owner off her own land, you borrowed against it, and then you had to get the owner out of the rooms before anybody came asking why the trust that really held the title had never been touched." I folded my hands. "You didn't evict me because you stopped loving me, Royce. You evicted me because I was standing in the evidence." He said my name, just once, Winona. Like there was a sentence coming after it. There wasn't. "You filed an eviction on a home you never owned," I said, low and even, my hands folded on my grandmother's trust. "And to do it, you forged the owner's name onto a deed. I am the owner. I have been the owner since I was barely grown and didn't know it. You put a brass lock on my door. You locked yourself inside the one house in this county that could prove what you did." Deputy Constable Hollis Pruitt closed his folder. I heard it close. He had come to that porch with a paper that said, "Remove the occupant," and he was a careful man, and careful men go where the record goes. "Ma'am," he said to me, and there was a different weight in the word now, "I'm going to need to not enforce this notice today." He turned to Doreen Pickett. "And I think your office is going to want all 5 of these." "All 5, Doreen said. She was already squaring the documents, the warranty deed, the trust, the quitclaim, the loop still lying across its false seal, the mortgage note. Her hands were shaking a little, not from fear, from the thing record people feel when a buried wrong comes up clean into the daylight. The forged quitclaims are getting flagged the moment I'm back at my desk. All of them. This one and the Tolliver parcel and the Roselle and the Biggs. That's a referral to the district attorney. "That's not a family matter anymore, Mrs. Pickett. That's the county's matter. It stopped being a family matter," I said, "the day somebody put a stolen seal in the public book. I want to tell you what the cruelty had been built on, because it matters that you understand it before the end." Royce Pickett never once, in all his scheming, spent the $2 to pull the title on his own house. He could not imagine that the filing cabinet wife, the one he called that to his friends, the one who stamped paper while real men closed deals, had been handed this whole house by a dead woman 35 years before he ever shook her hand. He could not imagine the record knew more than he did. That was his fear the whole time, underneath the truck debt and his mother's empty trust, the thing that made him move so fast and so ugly. He was afraid somebody would read the book. And the one person on this earth who read the book for a living was the very woman he was trying to put out in the street. They did not carry me off that porch. Nobody got carried anywhere. Royce drove off in his truck before the deputy finished writing, and where he drove to was not my business anymore, though the investigation that opened that summer was very much his. The lien got voided. The bank, when it understood it, had loaned $100,000 against a house its borrower never owned on the strength of a forged seal, came after Royce and after Verlene Aldridge both, and the district attorney's office came after them right behind. Maybelline Pickett sat in my kitchen a while longer in her good navy coat, gone small and quiet, and then Ardella Bunn, who had not said one word the whole time, walked over and held the screen door open for her, civil as Sunday, and Maybelline went out under the pecan tree she had tried to take from me, and she did not look back at the house, because the house had finally told her whose it was. I went down to the recorder's office myself a few weeks after, not as the woman who works there, but as a citizen with a stack of titles. I sat across from the chief recorder and I walked him through it, every parcel, my grandmother's hand all through the good records, and Verlene Aldridge's stolen seal all through the bad ones. Old Mr. Tolliver next door, who Dovey had quietly put in a trust the same spring she made mine, his house saved by a dead woman's foresight. The widow, Roselle, Pharaoh Biggs, 4 old East Lubbock families who would have lost everything to a lifted seal and a confident lie, exactly the way my own family lost everything when I was 9 years old and nobody in the room could read the paper. "We'll flag everyone," the recorder told me. "We'll get the others made whole." "You'll get these 4 made whole," I said, because these 4 had Cordelia Hargrove looking out for them before they knew they needed looking out for, and because I happened to read deeds for a living. I folded my hands on his desk. "And what about the ones who don't have a granddaughter who reads deeds for a living? What about the next old man on the next street who gets a confident paper slid across his table? Who reads the book for him?" He didn't have an answer that day. But there's a sign on the counter now, plain lettering, that tells any soul who walks in that they can pull the full chain of title on their own home for $2, and that the clerk will sit and read it with them if they can't. That sign was not there before. I asked for it. They put it up. The cobbler smell came back into those rooms by fall. I stacked the Sunday plates again on the deep porch for whoever was hungry, under the pecan tree, with the canyon lakes going silver down the way in the evening. And one of the people who came hungry was old Mr. Tolliver from next door, who still didn't fully understand how close he'd come to losing the house he'd lived in 60 years. So I did for him what Dovey did for me. I had Tisha Crane draw it up proper, a trust, recorded, his name and then his daughter's, paid and plain, and sitting in the public book where no lifted seal can ever reach it. And on a Sunday evening at my own kitchen table, under the light my grandmother ate her supper under, I turned the packet around to face him and slid it 3 inches across the wood. He read it slow. Then he looked up at me with wet eyes. I was not crying. I have never once cried in this whole telling. She holds the title now.